and the affirmative team. Let's begin. When I was younger, I enjoyed having a lot of snowball fights with my siblings, including Stephanie. One day, I came into the house crying because I had snow all over my face and in my coat. And I complained and told that Stephanie was the one who had caused all of my problems. And, well, what did Stephanie say when my parents asked her? Well, I had thrown the snowball first. So, as you can see here, there are sometimes two sides to every story. And today, I'd like to show you the other side of the story, looking at how we can uphold U.S. strategic interests within the status quo. Now, when you look at U.S. strategic interests, we need to examine first what are U.S. strategic interests. Now, I'd like to make it very clear that in today's debate round, the status quo actually does uphold U.S. strategic interests. And that includes U.S. strategic interests like increasing U.S. credibility, increasing United States, and ensuring United States well-being, and upholding human rights. I'd like to show you how we have done so within Sudan and within the world as a whole throughout this speech. But beyond going that, I'd like to question the affirmative team to prove how U.S. strategic interests are not being upheld in two different ways. First, the affirmative team must prove how the status quo actually harms U.S. strategic interests. And then secondly, how their plan will actually improve U.S. strategic interests. I believe in today's debate round, they have not yet shown either of these things. And with that being said, the status quo actually upholds U.S. strategic interests best. But to properly examine the situation within Sudan, we need to take a look at the entire situation. And that goes for what has happened in the past, what is happening right now in the present, and what will be happening in the future. So I'd like to begin by examining my first point, that of the past, establishing a little bit of context when it comes to Sudan. My first point under past is that Sudan works for Sudan. Sudan works for Sudan and Sudan's interests. Dr. Suleiman Baldo reported on February of 2018 that, quote, through forthcoming talks with the United States, the Sudanese regime seeks its removal from the U.S. state sponsor of terrorism list, one of the last remaining forms of U.S. sanctions on Sudan. Yet as the Sudanese government continues its inconsistent charm offensive aimed at U.S. policymakers, serious concerns linger about Sudan's true commitment to fight against international terrorism. Its disruptive and erratic foreign policy that includes recent overtures to and military agreements with Russia, its continued role as a regional destabilizer, and its ongoing repression of its people and persecution of minority religious groups, including Christians. Now, Dr. Suleiman Baldo, who is an expert on reporting to the UN and the African Union, has shown throughout this piece of evidence specifically the issues with Sudan, that the Sudan is not interested in working for U.S. interests. It is interested in working for its own benefit. Now, specifically going into this, the next question to the affirmative team is, why should we uphold Sudanese interests? One of their arguments is talking about how we should ensure debt relief for Sudan. Now, how exactly will that help U.S. strategic interests? It definitely will help Sudan, but there's no clear link to how it will actually help the United States. Now, with establishing the idea that U.S. strategic interests are upheld in the current system and that Sudan upholds Sudanese strategic interests, let's examine my second point, that of the present. What is happening in the status quo? And my first point under this is U.S. strategic interests are upheld. U.S. strategic interests are upheld. And I have a couple of subpoints under this that I'd like to look at, and the first one is that of progress made. Now, the affirmative team actually conceded this all the way back in Fact 1, when they stated that Sudan complies with U.S. standards. Now, that's not entirely true. Sudan actually has made progress towards complying with U.S. standards, but indeed, Sudan has worked towards upholding U.S. strategic interests because of the SSOT designation. And because of this, foreign policymakers within the United States have actually rewarded Sudan by removing sanctions, as we established in this cross-examination between the 1AC and myself. We talked about how the quote, as according to Jason Berkey on October 6th of 2017, quote, the U.S. government has eased sanctions against Sudan in a major steps toward normalizing relations with a designated terrorist sponsor whose leader has been indicted on war crime charges. Now, specifically, progress has been made with Sudan, and that is why the U.S. government has eased sanctions. But the second thing I'd like to note under how the status quo upholds U.S. strategic interests is that not only has progress been made, but there is potential for more. Potential for more. Now, specifically, the United States has provided an avenue for Sudan to actually remove the SSOT designation, as reported by Nadine Awadallah in November 8th of 2018 for Reuters. Well, Sudan said on Thursday, it had reached agreement with the United States on a second phase of talks aimed at removing it from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Washington lifted 20-year-old trade sanctions on Sudan a year ago. And U.S. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said in a statement, Washington wanted Sudan to make further progress on human rights, religious and press freedoms, improving humanitarian access, and expanding counterterrorism operations. Now, specifically within this piece of evidence, and as our contention as the negative team as a whole, is that we believe that progress can be made in the status quo to uphold U.S. strategic interests. And unfortunately, the affirmative team's plan actually harms that potential for more. Now, as I said before, the present actually shows that the United States' strategic interests are upheld through progress made in the past and the potential for more in the future because of the leverage we have through the state sponsor of terrorism designation. So why is removing that actually harmful? Well, let's examine my third point, that of the future. My first point under this, examining the status quo. Now, if we vote for the negative team in today's debate round, you will be having the status quo. What will actually come about because of the status quo? And my point under this is no harm. No harm under the status quo. Now, this was actually touched on in the advantage of the 1AC, specifically stated in the 1AC. Now, they quoted Robbie Gramer, a diplomacy and national security reporter at the Foreign Policy in November 8th of 2018, that stating that proponents of mending ties say the prospect of sanctions relief and lifting the terrorism sponsors designation represents the first opportunity in decades for the United States to compel Sudan to carry out meaningful reforms. And in today's debate round, as I've shown you, we actually do have that leverage, and we do have that prospect of lifting the terrorism designation by allowing Sudan to meet certain benchmarks. And so we can see that their own advantage is actually able to be accomplished in the status quo. Now, what will actually happen if we pass the affirmative team's plan? My first response and argument towards the advantage that the affirmative team has supposedly provided is that of no guarantee. No guarantee. Now, there are a couple of things that the affirmative team cannot guarantee under their plan. And the first thing they cannot guarantee is that Sudan won't pursue Russia. Now, if you may notice, nothing in their plan will actually stop Sudan from continuing to pursue Russia if they actually want to. And nothing in their plan will actually stop Sudan from doing whatever it wants once the designation is actually removed. It's important to note here that Sudan is actually currently pursuing relations with Russia even as the designations are put in place. So what will stop Sudan from pursuing Russia if the designations are removed? Ahmed H. Adam reported on December 2nd of 2017 that Bashir, or the president of Sudan, Bashir, told Putin, "We are primarily opposed to U.S. interference in the domestic affairs of Arab countries, in particular U.S. interference in Iraq." He also expressed support for Russia's role in Syria, and he also leveled serious accusations against the United States. So we can once again see here Sudan working for Sudanese interests, and unfortunately, we don't see how the affirmative team can change that. That leads to my second disadvantage, that of endorsing corruption. Because of the problems within Sudan that we have elaborated on, including persecutions of Christians and working for Sudanese interests, we believe that maintaining the status quo and allowing leverage through the SSOT designation is the best possible route to upholding U.S. strategic interests. Thank you.